It was McCormick's campaign that blazed a second path to authorization, and that was the Boston National Historic Sites Commission. This was the federal commission charged with figuring out how to create a national historical park in Boston. The commission began its work in 1955, and it submitted its final report to Congress in 1961. That report was hugely significant because it created a rough plan for the park as we know it today, and really, in many ways, determines what the park is all about. So, who made that report and what's in it? The commission consisted of 7 people. There were 2 politicians, Senator Leverett Saltonstall and Representative Tip O'Neill. Director Conrad Worth represented the National Park Service. The regional director, Dan Tobin, more typically sat in for him. The other 4 were presidential appointments. They included the noted preservationist Louise Crowninshield, Boston attorney John Sullivan. There's Charles Watkins, who back then was president of the Old North Lamp League. And finally, as chair of the commission, was plastics and textile magnate Mark Bortman. Bortman's an interesting character. He had many points of contact with Boston's heritage landscape, but most importantly, he led the Chamber of Commerce's Committee on Historic Places. There's a lot to say about this commission. Not much of it is good so far as concerns history making. You can find the details in the administrative history, but suffice it to say that those of its members who attended the meetings were generally combative, unfocused. Crowninshield recalled how, and I quote, the Irish politicians voted me down every time. The committee was so unproductive, in fact, that it had to hire a chief of party to keep it on track. And the person that they hired to do that was none other than Edwin Small, who, as we've seen, had been thinking about the shape of a national park in Boston ever since the 1930s. In fact, years later, Small recalled that it was him who actually did all of the commission's work. Those are his words. And when we read its final report, then, we are mostly reading what Edwin Small thought a national park in Boston should be. And if Small's background is any indication, he very much believed that national parks should, when planned for cities like Boston, be active partners in urban renewal. Urban renewal, for our purposes, refers to the various strategies used by American cities since the 1930s to encourage economic growth by removing so-called decay, what people back then called slum removal. Central to those strategies was the use of public-private partnerships to fund demolition of old roads and buildings, and the construction of new ones. The idea was that by creating new modern urban landscapes, Americans would want to live and shop in cities, thereby sparking economic growth.
There's only one way that the West End could have gone, and it was down. The people there were getting poorer, the tenements there were falling down, the fire hazard was increasing. There's only one way you can cure a place like the West End, and that is to wipe it out. It's a cancer in the long run on the community. This may seem ruthless, but this is an aspect of urban renewal.
And it's true that in many cases, urban renewal did breathe new life into old cities. It did so, however, primarily for people who already had access to privilege. Black people and immigrants, they suffered tremendously during this period from forced displacement and the rupture of long-standing community networks. In Boston, by the late 1960s, in fact, urban renewal had displaced over 10,000 families, and about 1/3 of those were families of color. Small had become a proponent of urban renewal during the late 1930s when he worked as superintendent of Salem National Historic Site. Conrad Worth was also a champion of urban renewal. Urban renewal made sense to Worth, who was the architect of the agency's post-war Mission 66 program, because he too believed that public partnerships with private capital would keep the NPS alive. Daniel Tobin believed it too. At one meeting, in fact, Tobin noted that serving tourists at Faneuil Hall was, and these are his words, a matter of business and a matter of good citizenship, an investment, as he put it, in citizen redevelopment. And of course, the man chosen to chair the Boston National Historic Site Commission, Mark Bortman, was deeply engaged with urban renewal by virtue of his membership in Boston's Chamber of Commerce. Bortman wanted desperately for the new national park to bring new business to Boston by way of heritage tourism. He knew that it could because the Chamber, which he represented, had been a leading sponsor of Boston's newest history attraction, the Freedom Trail. The Freedom Trail was really an instant success when it debuted back in 1951, and it quickly became a favorite reference for banks and restaurants and all kinds of other businesses that featured it in their advertisements. In that way, the Freedom Trail was itself very much a tool of urban renewal. It was a way to get white, middle, and upper class tourists to visit downtown and spend their money while there. So it was urban renewal then, by way of the Freedom Trail, that really inspired the people who'd been chosen to imagine what a national historical park in Boston should be. Their ideas about history, about race, about profit, all impact how history gets done along the Freedom Trail, and to this day, how it gets done in the park.